Book 78 of 2019 was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This book was really, really good. It's the second time I've read it. I read it about 5 years ago on the recommendation of somebody at work, and I enjoyed it when I read it then. And then it was forced into my book club, and I was a bit annoyed that I had to read a book I'd already read, because usually when I reread books I don't like them as much, but unusually when I finished reading this book I actually rated it higher on my Goodreads than what I did last time. I don't know if that's because objectively I did actually think it was better, or if because maybe I've got a little bit more subjective in my Goodreads ratings, maybe, not quite sure. I was just getting a bit confused there because I was reading my board, but basically the reason I usually don't like reading books a second time round is because I'm driven by novelty. So if I read a book that's quite similar to another book I've read, or like obviously if I'm reading the same book, I don't tend to like it as much. But I think the reason this one was good is because the first time I read it, I didn't know like some of the twists in it, whereas on second reading I kind of knew what they were. And it was a little bit like when you read Harry Potter on the second reading and you spot all the things that you didn't spot the first time. So it's one of those books that's quite good for that. It's beautifully written. Like, she's such a good writer. Like, it's got quite a lyrical, poetic quality to some of her lines, reminding me a little bit of can't remember his name, but the guy Vladimir maybe, who wrote Lolita. Like, some of his words, sentences were like gold, liquid gold, I think I described them as when I reviewed that book. This one's kind of not as good, but as him, but still very, very good, because obviously he's very good. Very well structured. So like in terms of like how it flips between certain characters and the order that it flips between them has been well thought out. And it's also got impeccable characterization. Like, it was very, very clear who the characters were. It was very, very clear how they'd got to be those characters and the development of those characters, or at least the main ones anyway. And the bits that perhaps weren't kind of explicitly stated, you could get, like, from reading between the lines, you could imagine how they'd have got to be the way that they are. It's post-apocalyptic fiction, which I absolutely love anyway. It's one of my favourite genres, second to dystopia. And simply because when it's post-apocalyptic, it kind of shows what life is like afterwards, like after all the societal structures have broken down, and it kind of makes you think about the impact that modern life has on people and what life's like without it. And obviously, like, sometimes without society there are positives, but also without society there are also negatives, and it kind of puts those in juxtaposition to each other, and that's what I really enjoy. What made this one really, really good was the synchronicities in it. One of my favourite things in books is synchronicities, where characters cross over and where they didn't realise that who the other person was, or things crop up. Like, so for example, the objects keep cropping up in different people. So for example, one character bought a paperweight for another character, and then another character took it from them without telling them, and then gave it back, and then that character gave it to another character, and then that character gave it back to the original person in the end. And you can say, okay, maybe that's a bit far-fetched, but in life, like, you cross paths with people that you don't even realise until, like, it all comes out. Like, for example, I remember when I moved to university, there was a girl that lived next door that had gone to school with a girl that I knew from back home, but in like a different place to where I was back home. And it was like, how weird is that? And then similarly, I met someone at book club that I'd known, like, I'd been on a night out with 10 years ago. Like, there's little things that happen that you don't realise until, like, I think Facebook was very good for letting you find out those things. But imagine how many paths you've crossed, and how many people who know other people. Like, I found out recently that somebody I know knows someone that I used to know, and I'm kind of not wanting to tell this person because I didn't like the other person. They weren't very nice to me at all. So it's interesting that, like, there's synchronicities all the time, and this book does that really well. I think someone at my book club was like, oh, that would never happen. I was like, you're clearly not aware of everything that's going on around you, because it happens quite a lot. And it was also kind of interesting to see like the different characters' lives and how they survived after the viral outbreak. Obviously they had like viral immunity or whatever, which is a likely scenario. It's a little bit science fictiony in that aspect, which is quite good as well. There's quite a lot of books that do the post-apocalyptic viral outbreak kind of genre, and it's interesting because the other one that is really famous for that is The Passage, and this talks about that very, very briefly, and unless you've read The Passage you won't pick up on the reference, but she mentions it, so I thought that was really, really interesting that she integrated that in, because if you do like the book, then The Passage is a trilogy that you might find interesting. Very good first book. The other ones are not so good, but they're still good, but not as good as the first one, and they're very chunky as well, so they'll take you ages to like read. What else was I going to say? Mandel's really good. She adroitly like refers to cultural references to allude to other things. So, for example, she makes a cultural reference to subtly hint to what the purpose of life is. So she kind of quotes a Star Trek quote, survival is insufficient, to kind of basically say it's not enough in a life to just survive, like you need more than that. And she's also kind of alluding to the importance of the arts in life, because there's this kind of bias in our society that arts aren't as important. You know, arts budgets get cut all the time by the government, particularly Tory governments, and that, you know, we should be focusing on STEM subjects, but actually like art subjects make our life worthwhile. Like in the arts is like philosophy and obviously art and drama and theatre, and you know, there's a lot of good stuff, music, there's a lot of good stuff in there that enriches our souls more than the logical pursuit of a scientific or, you know, such discipline. She also makes reference to materialism and how like the importance of objects and the importance of like different people, and how they change depending on the circumstance in society. So for example, you know, after this viral outbreak, computers and phones are put in a museum, they don't work anymore, motorbikes and cars don't work anymore, and the things that are kind of like wanted are like celebrity like magazines, because it's a link to the past, and you know, the importance on things is different. You know, like for example, high heels go into the museum because no one is going to wear a high heel in a post-apocalyptic world where you don't have that kind of pressure from society to wear heels if you're a woman. What else was I gonna say? I put at the end of my review that it kind of, you know, Mendel's kind of suggesting that society blinds us to our need to connect and contribute to a shared aim, because it's always trying to distract us with things like materialism and you know, trying to make us feel like other things are more important, like money's more important, getting objects is more important, when actually what we all really need is to connect with other people and to work on a shared project together. And we kind of like don't do that in society today, or the ones of us that do are obviously happier than those that don't. And so she was kind of making reference to that, but obviously this is between the lines, this is what I've took from it, it's not explicitly stated like that. So yeah, overall a really, really good book. It was just nice to read, and so I would recommend it for that reason. And it's got, you know, bits of stimulus in there. You know what I was saying before about her adroitly using cultural references, she uses them, like, so she references Shakespeare, she references Star Trek. She's kind of showing that that whatever is considered to be art is based on the selection of what's appropriate at that time. So it's, you know, the reason why people put so much onus on Shakespeare is because it's kind of almost like deemed as like important in arts, but why is Star Trek any less important? And it was like her kind of juxtaposition of those two was interesting, because it was like that question of, I guess, you know, when people go to Tate Modern and they criticise the art there because it's not like in the portrait gallery, it's like what is art? You know, is a blog post not art? Like, you know, it's all creative work, isn't it? So it's kind of like questioning, you know, why is it society's deeming what art is, and it should be an individual interpretation of what art is to that person rather than a collective thing, like people believe it's art because other people tell them so. So yeah, that was quite interestingly alluded to as well. So yeah, I'd recommend it. Given that I've read it twice and I still like it, it must be good.